You need the future, it is what you live and live for. I thank you, Shinji Ikari. My life was meaningful because of you.
Okay, so this took some time. But can you blame me? Tearing something apart, that's the easy bit. The difficult thing is putting it back together. Neon Genesis Evangelion is an anime directed by Hideaki Anno for Studio Gainax, and features lovable scamp Shinji Ikari on his quest to make his dad just be normal for 5 minutes. Okay, yeah, you know what Evangelion is. Love it or hate it, for better or worse, the meteoric effects of Neon Genesis Evangelion's successive impacts are undeniable, and reshape the culture it hit in ways enormous and imperceptible. I'll put my cards on the table from the start. I'm a bit of a fan. The show means an awful lot to me, and I've revisited it multiple times over the years and continually find new things in it. Some of those things are good, some of those things are not good. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. No. Today, we're here to talk about Evangelion's third impact. After its beginning, its death and rebirth, Evangelion was rebuilt. A 4-movie series that began in 2006 and ended literally as I was putting the finishing touches to the script, the so-called Rebuild of Evangelion seeks to retell the story of Shinji Ikari, Rei Ayanami, Asuka Shikinami Langley, and Kao on the big screen with a shitload more money behind it. However, from that pretty simple setup, these movies begin to change and become something that people find divisive, to say the least. And honestly, I think that's kind of sad. For their undoubtedly present flaws, each of these films does have value, and I can honestly say that my love of Evangelion as a thing would not be as strong without them. For how they succeed, how they fail, for how they're different and how they're the same, these films are always interesting pieces, and they deserve to be seen and discussed as such. Of course, we can never really make a second first impression, or a third. You've probably already made up your mind on how you feel about these movies. Art is always a mirror that reflects its audience, and if you don't see anything in this particular mirror, another person describing what they see in theirs isn't going to suddenly fill it up. But maybe it will help you feel a little differently about them, to see them from a new perspective. In their totality, these films mean a great deal to me, more than I often feel able to express. I'll try my best, anyway, to explore these strange feelings that sit in my gut and claw at my heart, and what impression Evangelion manages to leave on me on its third go at making a first one. And maybe by the end, I'll have an answer to show you for the question that brought you here. Directed by Kazuya Tsurumaki, Masayuki and Hideaki Anno, who also wrote the screenplay alongside Yoshiki Sakurai, this movie adapts the first 6 episodes of the original Neon Genesis Evangelion. following Shinji Ikari and his first few weeks in Tokyo 3, as he reunites with his father, makes new friends, struggles with piloting the monstrous Evangelion Unit 1 in battle against the bizarre angels, while attempting to get close to the mysterious Rei Ayanami. And if all that sounds familiar to you, well, welcome to Evangelion 1.0. The movie is most striking in just how close it holds to the original show, with shots, beats, and entire scenes being replicated pretty much one-to-one in big budget style, which makes 1.0 a surprisingly difficult film to talk about. If this was a remake that differentiated itself more from the original work, I'd feel comfortable simply talking about the film and how it succeeds or fails on its own merits, but the fact that almost every single scene invites a comparison to the original makes that challenging, to say the least. At the same time though, I don't want to just make a series of comparisons between the original show and this movie, both because that's pretty uninteresting, and also because it's not like there aren't differences. Differences that suggest what the Rebuild films will ultimately transform into. In fact, the movie opens with the first of these differences, a shot of red waves lapping against the shore, evoking the end of Evangelion's final moments. It's a shot that signals, right from the start, that things are going to be different, that we are following in the wake of the end of Evangelion, maybe literally, maybe not, but certainly in the themes and intent these films will strive towards. It's an impression that's amplified by successive shots, our introduction to the post-Second Impact world having a distinctly different feel from the original. I'm particularly enamored with this shot, which depicts ghostly monochrome trains stacked vertically across a city street, almost as if they're growing out of it, as if the imagery of Evangelion, which used trains to explore the inner worlds of its cast, is growing like weeds across the city. And then there's this shot, which really speaks for itself and how it parallels. I said I wasn't going to just compare things, but here I am. That's all I'm doing here, right? Do you talk about it because you feel you should? Because you feel you have to? Maybe. Or maybe it's just that if I talk about the things that are obvious, the things everyone can see, then I won't have to talk about the things I can see. Things people might tell me I'm wrong for seeing. There's subtle shifts like this throughout the film, building up to larger and larger ones that eventually reveal that there's more to this whole rebuild thing than meets the eye at first glance. Still, there's no denying that this is mostly just the first 6 episodes of Evangelion. The story is fairly neatly segmented along those lines, around Shinji's battles with 3 different angels and the lead up and aftermath of those fights. So we have the first third of the movie focusing on the introduction of Tokyo 3, the cast, the stakes, and the 4th angel, followed by kind of a disconnected second third, mostly focusing on friends Kensuke and Toji, alongside the fight with angel number 5, before a final stretch that is largely focused on Shinji's burgeoning relationship with Rei, as the fight with angel numero 6 looms. It all feels segmented, episodic, with each shift in the narrative occurring with practically an audible clunk, which isn't surprising considering it's holding so close to the structure of 6 episodes of television. The thing is though, movies aren't TV. In a TV show, it's fine to have the Toji and Kensuke episode or the Rei episode. It makes sense because each episode is an individual piece to enjoy as well as part of a wider whole, but in a movie, where each of these smaller stories don't have a structure that enables them to breathe all their own, it gives the movie an almost staccato rhythm and means it never quite gels together as a coherent piece. In adapting these episodes so closely, 1.0 also replicates a structure that, divorced from its original television context, feels uneven and meandering. The stuff with Rei is the most powerful stuff in the movie and is a major focal point of the film's climax, but does it have the power it could have had when, for vast stretches of the movie, she barely even appears? Maybe 1.0 could have built to this climax more naturally, weaving Shinji and Rei's growing relationship throughout the entire film, instead of backloading it in the second half. I feel like 1.0 could have been a lot stronger if it was more willing to break from the format of the show it holds so sacred and rebuild itself in such a way to better take advantage of the new medium, because as we've mentioned, it's not like 1.0 is totally unwilling to make alterations here and there, and those changes are the most interesting and revelatory parts of the film. One of the most notable of these shifts in direction is how we see Shinji's first battle with an angel come to an end, and how Unit 1's berserk state is revealed. In the movie, this comes pretty much how you would expect it to, chronologically where it should be. We see the angel attack Shinji, we see the situation he's put in, and then we see Unit 1 go berserk, lashing out at the angel and revealing itself to be more than the robot it appears to be, something monstrous, sinister, with a life of its own, unbound by the shackles placed on it. If you watch the sequence in the film without knowing how it's presented in the show, you likely wouldn't bat an eyelid. It makes sense, it works. The visuals are striking, and the way that Eva is framed, consuming the screen entire, as if we were a bystander barely able to comprehend this horrifying battle, sells the emotions the scene evokes perfectly. Purely on its own merits, this scene works great. But if you've seen the show, you'd know that the presentation of this revelation is different. The battle with Sachiel opens the second episode of the show, with Shinji in the robot totally unprepared for his first battle. The events we see play out just like the film, but as the tide begins to turn, Shinji cries out in pain, and the alarms begin to blare. We reach the point where Evangelion Unit 1 would reveal itself, and... and we cut, without warning, to the aftermath. Shinji in the hospital, waking after the battle, the lingering phantom pain in his hand haunting him. We are left totally in suspense as to the resolution of the battle, as the rest of the episode explores Shinji's first real day in Tokyo 3, as he moves in with Masato, and the events at the beginning of the episode sink into the back of our mind as we watch the light-hearted back and forth of Shinji and his new guardian. And it isn't until the end of the episode, in the quiet, moody tones of Shinji's new bedroom at night, do we see the truth of what happened the night before, and the revelation of what the Evangelion and this show really is. This is actually the moment that hooked me onto the show, got me interested in the first place. To me, it's one of the most significant and important choices the show makes early on, to draw out its first reveal, to let the audience get comfortable before it pulls the rug out from underneath them. And there's an argument to be made that by presenting this sequence more traditionally, 1.0 fails to adapt one of the things that makes this show unique and remarkable. But the thing is, we already know the Evangelion. We already know it can go berserk. We already know that this isn't just a robot. We already know that this isn't just a mecha show. Presenting the same sequence in the same way has little value to us because we've already seen it. We are not being shocked, we are not being surprised. If anything, to present this in the same way would offer the audience a comfort and familiarity that the show rarely so neatly indulged in. A remake cannot hope to have the same impact, the same effect, simply by doing what has already been done before. On a certain level, 1.0 does understand this, and wisely doesn't attempt to recreate a reveal that just wouldn't work for its intended audience. So, if we acknowledge the folly in attempting to blindly recreate what has come before, then what's the purpose of remaking at all? Why rebuild Evangelion in the first place if you know that there's no way your recreation can have the same impact on the same audience? Well, there's a few possible answers you can have to that question, and we'll explore a few as we go through this video, but 1.0's answer is that you can make it look amazing. Aesthetically, 1.0 really does feel like a kind of unrestrained, improved Evangelion, quote unquote, at least visually, though I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment. The animation as a whole is a lot more fluid, and there's less noticeable repeated shots and frames of animation. The backgrounds are far livelier and more evocative, better at selling the strange sci-fi world of Evangelion with a much busier and more visibly science fiction Tokyo 3. And then of course there are the action scenes, where everything isn't so much turned up to 11, but turned up to 1100. Everything is just that much more high octane and spectacular, with every inch of the film's budget on display in bringing these sequences to life. This delirious budget excess bleeds out into the text of the film as we begin to see small and large changes to these scenes that serve to further emphasize the sense that this is Evangelion, but more. What was once a machine gun is now an enormous minigun. What was once just some gun emplacements is now entire buildings armed to the teeth with weaponry. Energy attacks go from explosive beams of light to solar flares that can melt mountains in seconds, and maybe it's just me, but all that stuff doesn't necessarily feel like something the film is enthusiastic about. There's a feeling that it's all a bit much, all a little excessive, that maybe we're losing sight of something underneath the weight of all this. Still, for me at least, there's no denying the impact. I could watch the entire Ramiel sequence on a loop for hours. It is just endlessly cool to watch. The thing is though, it's not like this is adding visual splendor where there was none before. Neon Genesis Evangelion, the original, still looks great to this very day. The scenes recreated in this film all still look fantastic in their original forms and in places look better. I think that deeper colours really benefit certain scenes and often look a lot more vivid and distinct than 1.0's brighter, more washed out look. We've all heard this before, but injecting more money into something doesn't make it better. Restrictions breed creativity, and the loss of said restrictions does not necessarily equal to improvement. Some of the most notable and striking things about the original show came from its creators running up against the impossible barriers of time and money, and being forced to come up with creative solutions to those problems. The extremely good final 2 episodes of the show have much of their unique character because of this, and one of the most striking shots in the entire show is arguably This isn't to say that I don't enjoy these reimagined, redone scenes, because on a visceral level I really do, but can I say that I find anything more meaningful in them? I don't think I can. The visuals of this film are cool, but what do they add to Evangelion other than being cool? What does this movie say by itself that isn't already said by the show? Is 1.0 just something destined to be cut up into pieces and uploaded to YouTube in the form of videos entitled Unit 1 vs Ramiel, 1080p, 60 FPS, most epic battle ever? The one time the movie looks like it's going to break out of this mold is just before the climactic Operation Yashima, when, in attempting to convince Shinji to pilot the Eva, Masato takes Shinji and the audience on a detour from the original film, travelling down into the body of Evangelion, into its heart, conveyed through this incredibly arresting bodily imagery, and the scope and stakes of Shinji's battle are revealed to him. I find this scene so interesting because it's an example of Masato opening up to Shinji and trying to reach him in a way she didn't at this point in the show, but in a way that kind of fundamentally fails to understand what he wants or needs. She talks to him about the fate of the world and mankind and the battles that need to be fought, that it is his destiny to pilot the Eva and that everyone is counting on him, but is that what this story is? Is this Evangelion's heart, or is it a misunderstanding of what we want? This is the way things are, Masato says. This is what you have to be. But is it? This scene feeds into another slight deviation from the original show, caught in the middle of the otherwise structurally faithful recreation of the battle with Ramiel. In the original show, after the first shot of the operation misses, the focus of the scene becomes on the tension of the firing of the next shot, while Rei shields Shinji from harm. Here, there's a significant scene where Shinji is left shaken from Ramiel's blast, the full force of the film's big-budget visuals hitting him head-on, where Gendo demands his withdrawal and Masato asks for faith in him, as Shinji slowly struggles back into position. It's a small shift, and the film ultimately does surrender to the TV show once again after it, but it does attempt to tie together the somewhat episodic parts of the film into a story about Shinji finding the strength to pilot the Eva, and demonstrates a growing confidence in our protagonist. It's a shame that it feels so insubstantial, little more than another moment in a film that largely feels made up of individual moments without anything more than a basic character arc stringing them together. pieces without a larger hole to fit into. Good pieces, mind, sometimes interesting and new and exciting pieces, but those shards of the new are needles in a haystack of familiarity and repetition, a largely hollow exercise in fan service that offers what you already know you enjoy, but more. It sticks too closely to the original and ultimately smothers the things about itself that are genuinely interesting. You can almost say that it stands as a testament to the folly of remaking a story in a way that isn't able to change anything about it, the folly of being unable to change. It's a shame, ultimately. I'd love to see a version of this film that isn't so caught up on what's been done in the past. A film that's willing to let its hair down, loosen up a little. I wonder what that movie would look like.
Good morning, Ikari.
Good morning.
What are we working on today?
Pachelbel's Canon.
Cello's so easy. All you have to do is play arpeggios.
Okay, now we're talking. Evangelion 2.0 You Cannot Advance is not like its predecessor. It's different, both from that film and the original show, and the nature of those differences is crucial to its construction. This isn't a movie about adapting an arc or recreating the past. It's a film about trying to escape that past, the spectre of before that hangs over it. Evangelion 2.0 is a movie that is desperately trying to escape itself. In stark contrast to the way Evangelion 1.0 began, 2.0 has no desire to dance around its intentions. We immediately begin with a torrent of a new character piloting a new Evangelion, one that is practically unrecognizable, fighting a new angel in an environment we've never seen before. Our new pilot, Mari, is being directed in battle by a replicant nerve station, which is plainly incapable of dealing with the threat they're being faced with. Played on both sides by Kaji and even Mari herself, this representation of Nerve, of the old way of doing things, is unable to comprehend the way to fight the new, and ultimately is destroyed by it. The world is changing, and Evangelion cannot hope to survive by remaining the same. But the past has weight. It pulls things into its gravity well, and once it does, it's difficult to escape it. The first time we see an angel that looks similar to one from the show, it bears the greatest similarity to Leliel, but the plan Masato develops to fight it is not how that angel was originally fought. Rather, she borrows her past self's plan to deal with another angel, Sahaquiel. Sure enough, once the angel descends to the earth, it morphs, changes before our eyes into that very angel. In using this old plan for an old enemy, Masato demonstrates the sheer weight and gravitational pull of the past, a force so strong that it is able to change the form of an enemy and bring us the first angel fight of the movie that directly parallels one from the original show. And as the movie progresses, that gravity well will pull in our characters one by one, threatening to consume all the potential they have for the future and subsume it under the shadow of what has come before. The first scene of the film after the pre-title sequence is a recreation of a scene from the show, where Shinji and Gendo talk at Yui's empty grave. This scene, hoeing as close as it does to the original, reinforces both the divide between these two characters and the fact that this divide is enshrined by series canon. In a movie that has otherwise moved past its predecessor's insistence on recreating scenes wholesale from the original show, it is telling that the scenes that do remain the closest to the original are those involving Shinji and Gendo. Gendo and Shinji have this divide between them in part because they are Gendo and Shinji, and that is the role they have to play.
It'll be just like old times.
Who the hell wants to try and relive the past?
These scenes, so full of familiar turmoil, are made all the more harrowing with how they're contrasted against how the new scenes in this movie are so often really nice. 2.0 is surprisingly willing to just kick back and relax with a cast of characters that are genuinely fun to be around. While we may love this cast at least partially because of the difficult things they've been through and how we relate or sympathise with them in their darkest hours, 2.0 understands that those times mean little without showing these characters in their best moments, and the movie frequently goes out of its way to do just that. 2.0 is charming, funny, in a way the original movie kind of wasn't, in a way that isn't suggestive of the grimdark, depressing reputation surrounding Evangelion. Just like mankind is attempting to claw back some semblance of how the ocean used to be from the red devastation caused by the end of Evangelion and succeeding even just a little despite everything, these characters are trying to take back normalcy, their very lives, from that film's gravitational pull, and it lights a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, a better world is possible for these people. Well, maybe except for Asuka. In a movie where everyone else is beginning to press against the boundaries of their pre-established roles, where Shinji smiles and Rei opens up, Asuka remains largely the angry, insecure ace pilot we all know and love, and her inability to change marks her as a character that is getting left behind, at a distance from everyone else. She does take part in lunch, at least, a significant step considering how important meals are in this film. Meals are markers in a relationship, things that bridge the divide between one another. The long table Gendo and Rei sit at to eat their meal stresses not just their connection, but their separation, the distance between them. This is a relationship constructed by Gendo formally because of a past relationship he had that he cannot separate himself from. And it's only here, while eating this meal, that Rei is able to convince Gendo to eat a meal with Shinji, to take a step towards him. Rei is the hero of Evangelion 2.0, not Shinji. Well, Shinji helps a bit towards the end, but it's Rei that fights the hardest against the chains of canon that bind these characters, and comes the closest to healing these broken souls, suffering from wounds inflicted over a decade ago. Not by getting in the robot and fighting the angels, though she does do that, but by performing the simple act of attempting to heal an emotional divide between two people. And that's important because piloting the Eva was never Rei's problem. She didn't struggle with it like Shinji did. What she struggled with was reaching out to other people, to express her own feelings and her own desires, rather than simply be caught up in the currents of others, which makes it all the more powerful that she's the one challenging the fate of these characters, that she's the one attempting to move forward, to transcend herself. She's the one attempting to unify the divide at the center of the show through making a meal for Gendo and Shinji to eat together. She's fighting against herself, against who the show says she should be in order to do it. The new elevator scene is perfectly illustrative of just how far Rei has come and how far Asuka hasn't. In the original show, the elevator scene took place during Asuka's slow breakdown, as she increasingly struggled to pilot Unit 2, the thing she tied her entire self-worth to. In 2.0's version, Rei, almost precognitively, instead urges Asuka to seek happiness outside of piloting, before her inability to do so becomes poisonous. Her words fall on deaf ears, however, as Asuka steers the conversation back towards the topic of the original elevator scene, accusing Rei of being a doll, before Rei physically and verbally asserts herself in a manner she has never been able to do before, refusing to accept the past thrust upon her, and even beginning to articulate her own feelings towards Shinji. These clumsy first steps towards genuine understanding are really powerful, and it makes it all the harder to watch Asuka's inability to recognize her own feelings. Asuka's struggle to come to terms with herself was sad enough in the original show, but here, with all the progress everyone else is making. It's downright heartbreaking. It's fitting then that Asuka is at the center of the events that cause everything to fall apart.
I assure you that all will go according to Sele's plan. The true Evangelion.
Another echo of the past, another impact, forces things back on course. The destruction of Unit 4 and the arrival of Unit 3 heralds the beginning of the end of our heroes' attempts to escape their fate. We even see Unit 3 get placed back into the same crater as the site of its original disastrous activation test, like a piece being placed into a mold perfectly sized to fit it, and the original Nerve logo plastered across its plastic shielding. Not that everything remains exactly the same, of course. In a cruel twist of fate, with her Evangelion placed in storage and her sacrosanct role as pilot in jeopardy, Asuka, rather than think of herself in any way other than pilot, places herself in the role once played by Toji, her inability to transcend that role proving her undoing. I think a lot about this scene and what leads up to it, because it's not like Asuka is exactly the same as she was before. From this adorable shot with Rei on the phone to her conversation with Misato, the closer and closer we get to Asuka sitting in Unit 3, the more and more she opens up to herself and to us, but fundamentally, she's still Asuka. She's grown, but she hasn't changed, and those two things are not the same. Maybe some part of her is trying to change, maybe some part of her wants to change, but that change is difficult, complicated, and multifaceted, and requires accepting things and moving past things about herself that she doesn't want to. Evangelion 2.0 knows that to truly change, to truly become something better, we have to reckon with the parts of ourselves that are bad, that need changing. But that's hard. And in this scene, it becomes clear that despite the parts of itself that are crying out to change, to become something new, there are things Evangelion just can't let go of that it really, really should. This moment, with a 14-year-old kid in this awful, ugly, fetishistic plug suit that it tries to get away with a shitty, self-aware joke, is emblematic of one of the things that I find so deeply frustrating about Evangelion, which is that it is very frequently and very criminally horny. Listen, I love Evangelion. It's one of perhaps my absolute favourite TV show. I love it more than it probably deserves, but how Evangelion treats its female characters is basically indefensible. Its camera is constantly leering and pervy towards women, which would be off-putting enough if it wasn't also leering towards 14-year-old girls, which is about the point where people need to start going to jail. I think plug suits are extremely cool, but if anyone tries to tell you they aren't also creepily horny, they are a liar. Most of all to themselves. I understand there's an element of cultural difference here, but come on! And if this wasn't enough, the show also has some pretty damn conservative views on the place of women in the world, dumping the most basic ass Freudian 101 shit onto their lap, like, oh, Misato, deep down, she just wants to fuck her dad, and Ritsuko is just gonna become her mum and even fuck the same guy and have the exact same weird rivalry with a child for stealing attention away from her. It's so shit for a show that I do think otherwise treats its characters with real nuance and empathy. And all these years later, Eva is still doing the same shit. Oh, and okay, all the stuff in End of Evangelion is like, okay, this movie is... I don't want to talk about this.
Is it not true? Do you not believe this is wrong?
No, it's true. Everything I said is true. I love this show and I hate that part of it, but talking about that part of it, saying that I know this exists and can tolerate it, I'm afraid about what that says about me. I'm afraid of letting people see me.
And you don't want people to see you?
Not exactly. People have seen me before, but I'm afraid that if they find out too much, they'll hate me. Because I do. To change, and change meaningfully, it isn't just about saying different things or doing different things, it's about becoming something else. It's about recognizing parts of yourself that you want to be different and working to acknowledge them and change them. Evangelion 2.0 wants to escape. It wants things to go differently, but on a deeper level, it's not actually willing to let these things go. It's willing to change the ARCHAEOLOGY to shift it around a little into a cool new design, but it's not actually willing to get rid of it. It'll change an Evangelion's design, but it'll still be an Evangelion, and it will have new scenes and new jokes and new plug suits, but it isn't actually willing to be less horny about it all. As bad as that is, I do think it is a serendipitous bit of self-indulgence that is revelatory of what this movie really is. I don't think this is a movie about what it means to change. I think this is a movie about how hard it is to change and how people struggle to become better, to move past themselves, and how the old ways and old roles they could so easily slot back into are so comforting. And the horny shit is just that, an awful old habit you're seeing someone you love fall back into despite their best efforts to grow. To watch Evangelion strain against the boundaries of itself and ultimately falter is to watch our own struggles to do the same. The ways in which it fails are powerful, all the same for how we ourselves fail in this same task, to grow and to change. This complicated, practically adversarial relationship with itself makes the Bardiel sequence in this film all the more powerful. For the first time in 2.0, we indulge in a 1.0 style near shot-for-shot remake of the scene from the show. This shot, with Bardiel's inhuman stride towards the camera with the sun behind it, is all the more ominous and terrifying because it represents Evangelion itself striding forward to reassert itself. As if to punctuate this, the superb soundtrack of the film, mostly composed of new songs with some occasional callbacks, returns to the original as well, playing a rendition of The Beast practically identical to that which came before. And so is the scene, replete with the dummy plug taking over and Unit 1 destroying Unit 3 mercilessly, Shinji watching helplessly as Unit 1 crushes his friend, along with any hope we may have had. The rift between Gendo and Shinji, so defining for these characters in this show, could be healed. Like Shinji, we are powerless to stop Evangelion forcing itself back into the past. Things fall back into familiar patterns, repeating old shots, old beats. Shinji walks the path he did before. Rei is unable to stop him, and even Misato's attempts to reach out are rejected. The film falls back into routine, into Evangelion. But if the start of this film taught us anything, it's that the old routines cannot hope to withstand the new. And so...
Attention. The Japanese government has declared a state of emergency.
The film submitting to the past, accepting Evangelion, accelerates its fate, and the battle with the 10th Angel plays out with ominous echoes of End of Evangelion. Only Unit 2, piloted by Mari, unleashed from the gravity of Evangelion, stands in defiance, able to do things with it that other characters have been incapable of. She can twist Unit 2 into a new form that no one has seen before, and this form is able to make dents in the Angel's armor. But even this is not enough. Evangelion will not be denied. Rei, once again the goddamn hero of this movie, works together with Mari to breach Zerul's defenses to sacrifice herself, as she has done before, but the futility reaches critical mass, as Zerul merges with Rei, with the character that fought the hardest against the fate of her and her friends, being consumed by Evangelion, the agency inside her melding with the unstoppable ontological weight of the past to become something new and familiar at once, something that nerve cannot fight against. But not everyone will accept it. Not everyone will accept the way things are.
I want Rei. Give her back!
It's so triumphant to see Shinji finally say no. To see him inspired by Rei and Mari, maybe without even realizing it. to fight against the tide of his destiny, to fight for himself and not because someone told him to. It's genuinely moving to see, but there's also something familiar about this. How much of this is actually a new path for Shinji and Evangelion, and how much of it is echoes of what has come before? There's a lot going on in Evangelion 2.0 You Cannot Advance, but I think so much of it can be summed up in that title. What does it mean to move forward? What does it mean to be something and wish to be something more, something, if not different, then better than what you are now? I think everyone at some point in their lives who has tried to improve themselves, tried to change something about themselves, knows that it isn't as easy as just wanting to be better. Our old selves have gravity and they do not give up without a fight. And sometimes our old habits pull back at us, at our ability to meaningfully change and leave them behind. We can resolve to read more, eat better, or be kinder to others, but unless we address the habits or ideas or beliefs that lead us to be the person we are, then it's possible, even probable, that the change we desire will never come. And in its wrestling with itself, Evangelion demonstrates, with the characteristic empathy and wit that I've always found in the series, an understanding of this process with a clarity that few films are able to manage. Evangelion wants to change, to become something new, but while the sacrosanct tenets of itself remain, while Rei is unable to believe that her own life has value to herself, while Asuka is unable to find a reason to live outside of Eva, while Shinji is still consumed by his self-loathing and his desire to be praised by his abusive father, while the rift between these characters, despite the best efforts of others, remains, can Evangelion advance? Or will it simply redo, do. When I first started watching Neon Genesis Evangelion, I knew a few things about it. I knew it was about a boy in a robot. I knew it was sad. I knew it was weird. And I knew about Kaoru Nagisa. Reading Kaoru is difficult. Not only because his meteoric impact, both on Shinji Ikari and much of the audience, is utterly disproportionate to his actual screen time in the original show, but also because so much of that precious little time with him is so fraught, so enigmatic. Kaoru speaks a great deal in that time, but so much of it is musings on the others around him, and so much of it is wrapped up in deception, in the obfuscation of his nature as both the fifth child and the final angel, that it's impossible to tell if Kaoru is letting down his AT field to allow us a glimpse at the soul inside, or if he's simply making a feint to lure Shinji in. It's not really a surprise then that readings on Kaoru's character can vary so wildly. For me though, who Kaoru Nagisa was obvious as soon as the credits rolled in episode 24. I didn't have the words to describe how his character made me feel, and even now it's something that I struggle to fully articulate, but in the 7 years it's been since then, I have at least found some words for it. To me, Kaoru is emphatically not the straightforward villain that some argue that he is. The episode deploys the tropes of the queer-coded villain so bluntly and obfuscates Kaoru's identity so thinly that to identify the episode as simply the story of a friend being revealed to be an enemy feels incomplete, unsatisfactory. What reason would Kaoru have to toy with Shinji, to manipulate him? It can't be to simply access terminal dogma, as he almost literally just strolls in there with zero effort and with Shinji's active resistance. He even worries that Shinji is late, that he won't be able to stop him. The answer that makes the most sense to me is that Kaoru really did want to reach out to Shinji and Rei, that he was genuine in his feelings and truthful in what he said, that he really did love Shinji Ikari. In conversation with other characters like Rei and Seilei, Kaoru hides his hands, or maybe his wrists, in his pockets. Only with Shinji are his hands visible. Only with Shinji does he genuinely reach out, both physically and by offering him the space to express himself without judgment or expectation. The twist of this episode is not that Kaoru is secretly an angel, not that he was evil all along, but that his feelings were indeed genuine, that he really did care for Shinji, and that he really did think humanity was more worth saving than he was, but he felt he was unable to escape his role as the final angel. You could argue that I'm being magnanimous with Kaoru, that I'm making generous assumptions when I could just as easily make unkind ones, and maybe that's true. It's almost certainly true. But this isn't really something I can pretend to be objective about, because it's hard to think of a single character in any work of fiction that has had so profound an impact on me in so short a time as Kaoru Nagisa.
Yeah, no kidding, right? When I watched Evangelion for the first time in 2013 and 2014, the show made a huge impact on me, but it was Kaoru who left the greatest impression. I had known characters that I identified with and saw pieces of myself in before, but Kaoru was the first that tapped into deep, fundamental parts of myself, parts that I wasn't fully aware of and hadn't really come into contact with before. In Kaoru, I saw a fractured, broken mirror that reflected me more clearly than any pristine mirror I had ever encountered before, reflecting both myself as I currently existed and my aspirational self both.
In Kaoru, I see the struggle to make myself understood, the struggle to understand others, the struggle to reach out my hand and have another hand offered in return. At the same time though, Kaoru is able to understand others in a way I have often failed to do. He puts voice to profound feelings Shinji has but cannot explain. He is able to empathize with him. When it is most important, he is able to express his own feelings with almost pinpoint precision, feelings which often do not come easily to the young person Kaoru is or a young person watching him. Kaoru's queerness, all the more profoundly existent for Studio Khara's frankly laughable attempts to sidestep it, comes to him with a natural ease that was genuinely stunning to a deeply closeted pansexual genderfuck like myself, who would not find the words for how they felt for years to come, but found the image, the feeling, hidden in this cartoon about robots that weren't really robots. before I knew I did not want to be male, I knew I wanted to be, in this aspect at least, Kaoru Nagisa. I'm not saying that Kaoru is literally trans or literally autistic, or that Kaoru will read as such to all autistic and trans people and resonate with them in the same way, but art is about more than what things literally and factually are. Art is images, sounds, words, play, coalescing together in a kind of inexplicable, beautiful alchemy with our own thoughts and feelings and experiences. An alchemy that creates the impact art leaves on us. And oftentimes, it is these feelings that are far more powerful than when a work tries to make things more explicit, more obvious. Almost all of the time, when I see a canonically autistic person in a work of fiction, I see an awkward, off-putting caricature, a collection of ridiculous and sometimes offensive stereotypes masquerading as a real autistic person. I do not feel represented by these characters. I do not see myself in them. Their attempts at authenticity only end up leaving them empty of it, devoid of the true lived experiences of an autistic person. Similarly, explicit depictions of queer people, not always, but often, are so awkward in one way or another that I often feel like the invariably primarily cishet creative staff were better off not really bothering. It is possible to find a meaningfully queer experience in something like this, and when it works well, it often hits even harder than the vast majority of these more metaphorical renditions. But there is still something so special about this kind of emotional archaeology, finding yourself in places you never thought you would, finding something that speaks to you in ways neither you or the work expected. Kaoru is not canonically autistic or trans, and depending on which obviously incorrect fan or official Studio Khara translator you might be talking to on a given day, he might not even be canonically queer. But how Kaoru feels is how it feels to be those things to me. And that is more true and more authentic than any canonical label would create. He feels like how it feels to be autistic, gay, trans, and suicidal. When I had thoughts like that around the time I watched this episode, I often characterized those thoughts in terms of relieving a burden off others, doing others a favor. It was a story I told myself to try to paper over the inevitable destructive hurt that would result from that act. I wanted to make something selfish into something selfless. What Kaoru does at the end of episode 24 to offer himself up as a sacrifice to Shinji so that he may continue to survive is what he presents as a selfless act done for the sake of another. But it isn't that simple. It's a story he tells himself to paper over his own selfish desires. While I stand by my rejection of the idea that Kaoru toyed with Shinji out of pure malice, he is still a manipulative character. While I don't believe he ever truly lies to Shinji, he doesn't tell him the full truth either. He still puts Shinji in a place where Shinji is the one who has to fulfill his final wish. A wish genuine in its promise of life to Shinji and the rest of humanity, and selfish in its deeper desire for death. A death that Kaoru sees as the only way to escape the gravitational pull of the role he is born into. A death he embraces in ignorance of the pain it will cause to his executioner, unaware of the consequences that will follow in his wake. The end of Kaoru is the beginning of the end of everything else. Knowing that what you did led to all of this Could you imagine the guilt? How much would you want to change things, to set things right? How much would you want to redo?
This is it. The time has arrived, Shinji Ikari. And I give you my solemn word. I'll show you true happiness.
You're late!
Sorry. Shall we begin?
Sure.
What happens when you cannot escape gravity? When you soar to the heavens with all the good intentions in your heart, breaking through the atmosphere, only to come crashing back down to Earth once again? What happens to you when you burn up on re-entry, and who gets caught in the crater left in your wake? What does guilt feel like to you? I don't remember the first thing I did that made me feel truly guilty. Not the kind of thing where you did something bad, but it wasn't that big of a deal, or something that can be easily brushed under the carpet with a few kind words. No harm done, easy mistake to make, don't worry about it. Nothing like that. This is the kind of thing where you know you did something truly meaningfully wrong, where others have been hurt and you know that hurt is real and it was your fault, where there's no easy answers, no clear ways to repair the damage that has been done, where it's just you and the people you hurt and an infinite stretch of time to sit with what has happened. I don't remember the thing I did to make me feel like that, but I remember feeling that. It feels like an anger, a hatred I project on myself, where even the sight of my own face has all the weight of the face of a mortal enemy, of seeing the face of someone who hurt someone you love, because that is what you're seeing. It feels like an anxiousness, a jittering, frantic desire to repair the unrepairable, a feeling that drives you to do stupid, irresponsible things that might even hurt people all over again, people who just need time or space from you, as you grasp at whatever straws you can find to find something, anything that will let you hear the words you need to hear more than you need air to breathe. It's okay. I forgive you. I see myself in one of the most derided and controversial scenes in the film, the all too familiar ice-cold shoulder given to Shinji by the rest of the cast aboard the Wunder, their refusal to explain themselves being such a painfully human response to the one that hurt them. Their anger is as real as it is understandable. None of them even want to look Shinji in the eye. And while this behaviour will ultimately lead to more problems, you can't exactly blame them for reacting this way. People who have been hurt don't often make rational decisions. Maybe explaining things to Shinji would have been the right thing to do, but I don't think it would have been the true thing for them to do. And yeah, the smart thing for Shinji to do would probably be to just lie down and accept his punishment, to not be bewildered or angry, to accept what he has done and the hurt he has caused. But when was the last time you responded with such level-headedness when you were in the wrong? It takes time for guilt to sink in. It's not always an instant reaction. It can be more of a slow, crawling realization of something that lies in the pit of our stomachs, growing and growing before the weight of it becomes heavy enough to drag us into it. This isn't a movie about people making rational decisions and smart moves. It's a movie about what it means to wake up in a worse world because of something you did. Something unthinking and maybe even well-intentioned, but ultimately hurtful and destructive all the same. Where even the reasons you did what you did seem almost hollow and meaningless in the morning after. Feelings incarnate in the new Rei Ayanami, a person who, for now anyway, is unable to escape the role of Rei Ayanami's ghost, a haunting reminder of Shinji's mistake. Almost singularly, the movie explores these sensations of waking up in a world that you feel honestly, truly hates you. That post-Third Impact world is one of the film's highlights, being perhaps the greatest visual achievement of the entire Eva franchise up to this point. It's one characterized by the surreal, but not in the way we often use that word when describing media like this, or even other Evangelion works. It's not surreal because it has a convoluted plot and isn't interested in the details, but because its environment so beautifully reflects the inner worlds of its characters. At every turn, the film eschews realism, logic, instead using its visuals to reflect the unconscious of our central character. Scenes like this cannot be understood by thinking of this as a place that might actually exist. Instead, to comprehend its meaning, we must look at what the images it is a part of tell us about Shinji and the story being told. This scene in particular is striking in how much it evokes theatre, with its sparse and minimalist stage and overpowering nonsensical backdrops. There's no reason why Nerve HQ would be constructed like this, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the mounting horrors Shinji is presented with, and the most striking way you can present that feeling visually, the greater the impact on the audience. Rather than harm the story, this rejection of realism in favour of surrealism only enhances it. Plot-wise, 3.0 can be difficult to parse on a first viewing, but in terms of emotional clarity, the film is breathtakingly accomplished and absolutely pinpoint. The visuals are so powerful, so emotive, that they are able to convey so much more about the interiority of its cast than both the previous films combined, or any approach more bound in realism. And yet, it neatly sidesteps a problem often encountered in weaker surrealist works, where there's almost no grounding in reality at all and no way for us to get into the interiority being portrayed. It has a traditional plot, understandable character arcs. We understand Shinji's emotions reflected in his environment because we understand what he has been through to reach this point. The real and the surreal blend together to convey the emotions of the story in a way that neither could manage on their own. Let me explain. There's this manga I read last year called Our Dreams at Dusk. It's a pretty simple story about queer people finding their place in the world, and I loved it. It's well written, and I liked the characters, but what really made this something special, what made it something that I love, was the artwork. It's always beautifully drawn, but what makes it one of the best illustrated comics I've ever read is the way artist Yuki Kamitani blends surrealism into pointed moments, using images outside of the strict reality of the story to illustrate how our protagonist feels. Rather than having the character simply listening to music, we see this beautiful flowing cloudscape, the music interwoven with the cold he feels through the snowflakes, the people speaking in the same room, the fan above him, and then there's this image which is just, I don't really have any words. It's just the most beautiful, powerful depiction of pining, of desire, of what it means to yearn for another that I think I've ever seen. More about love is said in these 2 pages than some romance writers have managed in their entire lives, certainly more than has ever reached me. When I saw these pages for the first time, I just thought, yeah, that's it exactly. That's how it feels. No one ever put it like that before. No one's ever said it right before. Not till now. A skilled cinematographer, writer, or artist can convey emotions through how their words and shots are composed, but these breaks in reality, these surreal scenes that bring the emotions of the main character to the forefront to paint the most vivid picture possible, is such a powerful and resonant technique when done right, and 3.0 does it so right. I've seen movies that talk about guilt, read books that describe how it feels, even played games that tried to convey it through mechanical interactions, but none of them have ever really succeeded in conveying how it really feels. None of them have been as a mirror to how I feel guilt. None except for 3.0. When I see Shinji walk through the cavernous, empty halls of what remains of Nerve headquarters, I see someone wandering through the ruins of the world they destroyed through their own actions, searching for anything to keep their mind occupied, but unable to escape seeing their guilt stained red over every wall. We see the enormous gaps in the world left behind by the absence of Unit 1, and the absence of Shinji's purpose in life. We see the absurd leftovers of a vanished world, each one piling on top of one another like clots in the wound Shinji has left in it. A world overflowing, drowning in Evangelion ephemera, every piece of it a reminder of what happened, what you tried to escape, what you failed to do. A world where everywhere you look, you see the instrument of your sin. Looking at this bloodstained world captures what it feels to look upon the world around us when our hearts are weighed down by guilt. And in the centre of it all, an oasis of peace and tranquility in a sea of blood red, a flicker of hope that forgiveness and redemption is possible. No one wants to believe that more than Kaoru Nagisa himself. From the very first film of the Rebuild series, he announced his intention to change things, to make Shinji truly happy, to help him avoid the spiral that occurred in the wake of Kaoru's death in the original show. But the secret, hidden desire behind those words is a more selfish one. Kaoru wants to fix the mistake he made, to redeem himself for the role he played in Shinji's mental state at the end of Evangelion. The centre of the conversation the rebuilds are having with that film is Kaoru, the only character fully conscious of his past mistakes and actively working to, if not correct them, then at least reverse them. His status as the first angel even suggests that he is maybe the one who began the rebuilds, spinning the wheel around one more time out of an all-consuming desire to atone. That desire is communicated beautifully through what is undoubtedly the definitive Kaoru performance, one overflowing with warmth and obvious affection without sacrificing his almost alien aloofness. Much more than before, as much is told in how Kaoru speaks and acts as in what he actually says. He is direct and blunt with his words, but lets so much more emotion come through than in the past. He's more unguarded and comfortable with himself and Shinji than before. This is the story that really reveals who Kaoru Nagisa is, who he was, and who he's trying to be. There remains a certain degree of tension to him, and uncertainty as to whether his motives are genuine, but I find that all of that is dispelled the instant he takes the DSS choker from Shinji and places it on himself, knowing full well what it means and what it could lead to. Kaoru is willing to do anything, sacrifice everything, including himself, just to make the person he cares so deeply about happy, which makes it all the more heartbreaking that he can't. Kaoru has a fixation in this movie. Just as much as Shinji, he longs to redo the past, to fix things. He wants a new world, a new future, but the only way forward he can see is to redo the past over and over until he gets it right this time. When I feel guilty, I spend so much time wishing impossible things, wishing for the ability to go back in time and do things differently, to know ahead of time the right and wrong things to do, instead of just focusing on what I can do now. Kaoru is just like me in that way. And just like me, by always looking backward, he's always trapped by the mistakes of the past, repeating them over and over, unable to look ahead. Yes, Kaoru really does just want to help Shinji, but what does Kaoru actually do to accomplish this goal? What is his plan? Kaoru's piano playing with Shinji is actually training him to eventually pilot Evangelion 13, something he never divulges to Shinji or asks his consent for. Kaoru is manipulating Shinji all over again. I know he's not doing it maliciously. I know he's doing it because he thinks it's what's best for Shinji, but he's still doing it. It's demonstrative of the fact that despite his desire to do better, Kaoru hasn't changed enough to truly do something different. It's a reminder that for as much as he presents himself above it, Kaoru is still, deep down, just a sad child like the rest of them, trying to escape a past self that has its hooks deep into his heart. In this way, Kaoru is why Evangelion means so much to me. Alien and strange and different, but so completely human and true. For all the mysterious lore and cool vibes that swirl around him like a maelstrom, in the end, Kaoru is just a person who loves someone so much, so powerfully, that he's willing to do anything to make them happy, but deep down knows that no matter how hard they try, they just cannot be the person the one they love needs. Shinji needs to grow, to move forward, to improve himself, to live, but Kaoru loves him for the way he is right now and will only encourage him to remain as he is, despite whatever feelings they may have for each other. Because of who they are and who they need to be, they cannot be what the other needs. They cannot truly be together. And this is just... This is the point where I have to abandon even the slightest pretense that I can talk about this film in any kind of universal or objective manner. Because this movie, or maybe more specifically Kaoru in this movie, came to me at a point in my life where I really, really needed it. It's not just that this is the movie that gave me the words I needed to confront Kaoru and I's fantasy of a heroic suicide for the selfish and toxic and dangerous thought it was, but everything else in the movie too. Everything this movie says about guilt and love and regret and loss and the feeling of waking up in a different world, fundamentally changed by the perception that you are hated by all around you. It all rings so true. It almost feels like a movie that was made specifically for me at a specific time in my life, at a time when I was really struggling on many, many levels. And when I was still deep in the pain of that, I watched this movie and saw such a beautiful world inside, big and vast enough to fit my story in it, but close and personal enough to make that story fit. In it, I found
a degree of peace, catharsis. A movie that felt like it understood the impulse that lay at the heart of that aforementioned fantasy in particular and exposed it for what it was, showed its consequences. The red world of Third Impact is not just Shinji's creation, but an echo of Kaoru's selfishness, resonating across time and space. This movie made me feel, for one of the few times in my life, like I wasn't alone. That there were people out there who understood me. And for a character like Kaoru, who resonated with me in just such a way, so strongly at one point in my life, to come back into it after we both changed in some ways and remained the same in others, and still make me feel like I'm not alone in the world. It means more to me than I can say. And maybe that's why this movie just doesn't resonate with a huge amount of people. Maybe there's just nothing in there for them. But I'm sure there's something out there. Something that does make you feel like this. Something that hits you just right in such subtle and intricate ways that few others can see what you see in it. The most special works of art of all, I think. If you have something like that, something you hold dear like that, you'll understand why I cried a lot the first time I saw this film, and why I cry every time I revisit it. How could I not? Every time I watch it, I feel that same hand reaching out to me across an unknowable distance, resting on my shoulder, letting me know that I'm not alone, that others feel what I feel, and that I am going to make it. Maybe one day I'll be able to get through this movie without tears, but that day isn't today. Because, truthfully, I still haven't changed that much, and neither has Kaoru. See, there's one final thing about this film that really defines how relatable Kaoru is in it. And that's how it all goes wrong.
For all the talk surrounding 3.0 about how it's the film that truly diverges from Ava's past and forges into new territory for the series, for good or ill, what's most emotionally crushing about it is how underneath the surface everything happens as it does before. And of course, why wouldn't it? 3.0 is simply the natural continuation of the themes of 2.0. We're once again exploring what it means to try to change without changing, to change your world without changing yourself. But this time, we explore the consequences of that, of the people you might hurt on the way to a better place for you and others, and how that might make you feel. The god-slaying ship Wunder is the shape of the movie in itself. It has consumed Evangelion, becoming unrecognizable, but is still unable to move past it, unable to change in a way that isn't on the surface. Unit 1 still powers its engines. The triumphant music that heralds its ascension to the skies actually originates from Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water, the work Hideaki Anno directed right before Evangelion, an echo of the past haunting this supposed victory over it. And inside its gorgeous, singularly evocative and strange design, we see Masato and Ritsuko replicate the same dynamics that came before. There are some new faces, sure, but these are the same people at the same stations fighting the same battles. Vile is another paramilitary organization with an all-caps German name using Evas to fight. The more things change, right? They can dress themselves up all they like, but in the inside, they haven't changed. They haven't grown. That's the curse of the Evas. But that curse isn't unbreakable. In the final battle, Rei, Asuka, and Kaoru all demonstrate, each in their own way, a change that shows that maybe, just maybe, a better future is possible for these people. Asuka is able to define herself outside of Unit 2, sacrificing it to save the Wunder. The new Rei Ayanami, who has been so thoroughly and completely haunted by the role she was born into this world to play, decides what she is going to do, not what the old Rei would do. And Kaoru Nagisa, the boy at the center of it all, saves what remains of the world, saves the person he loves by repeating what has come before, only better this time. By taking the DSS choker from Shinji, he frees him from the burden of being the one who has to perform the act. Kaoru dies, but it is not Shinji who killed him. It's a small improvement, to be sure, and the film leaves no doubt as to the consequences of those thoughts by the horror left in their wake. Kaoru still has a long way to go, but he's not the only one. It's true that these people, for all their desire to, haven't escaped the past. They haven't been forgiven, they haven't changed, and they haven't made a brighter future yet. But that doesn't mean that they're incapable of it. It doesn't mean that despite everything, they haven't taken steps needed to become better, stronger, happier people. Maybe all sins can be forgiven. Maybe there is hope. And the shape of these characters is the shape of the film. Even though things transpire as they had before, even though our characters haven't escaped themselves, even though the movie doesn't even necessarily believe that it can change, in exploring this story of grief, of regret, of guilt and pain, by telling a story that Evangelion hadn't necessarily up to this point, it proves that it can change. In a beautifully ironic way, 3.0 proves that one can become something new. And seeing that, and seeing this film successfully accomplish that change, all I can really say is that it genuinely gives me hope. If Evangelion can change, if Evangelion can become better, surely we all can, right? For nearly a decade, the true, final end of Evangelion was Shinji being dragged into the horizon by Asuka, leaving behind, once and for all, the tape player that has been with Shinji from the very beginning. Will Shinji change? Will these people find a better future for themselves? Or will the past simply repeat over and over again? Can we truly meaningfully change, learn from our mistakes, and become different people? I don't know. But I know that it's possible. I know there's a chance, no matter how small. I know that no matter how bleak or hopeless things might seem, no matter how comfortable the past may be or how scary the future is, there is hope. There will always be hope.
At time of recording, after nearly a decade in waiting and multiple delays, the final Evangelion film in this series at least is about to be released in the West. I, of course, have not seen it. Which makes this a strange video, right? Why would I only review 3 parts of this 4-part story? Well, it's because those 3 parts are already interesting things all on their own. They aren't waiting for some final installment to tie it all together. They succeed and fail each on their own merits and say their own things loud and proud. I wanted to highlight the ways in which each of these films has value in and of themselves. Rebuild of Evangelion is already good. At times, it's already great. Hopefully the last one will be great too, but if it isn't, no big deal. I still got at least 2 movies that mean a great deal to me out of this whole mess. I got 3.0. And that's all I'll ever need from it. When it comes to art, I don't really consider myself a particularly good critic. I don't think that I'm knowledgeable enough in any one medium to be able to speak authoritatively on any of them. I can talk about what I know, what I feel, but so much of that feels like I'm just telling you about how beautiful a rainbow is. In this video, I've tried to show you how I feel as much as I just tell you, because some emotions are beyond my words, and because the thing that makes these movies, and 3.0 in particular, so special to me is an almost indefinable quality. I love them for many reasons. The visuals are stunning, the music is on point, the characters are engaging and fun to be around, and the performances are wonderful. But the reason it is so special to me is simply because I can look at it and say, that's it. That's how that feels. In a way that I just can't with most other things.
I don't like making statements like, the best art is, or truly special art does this, because the idea of saying that one way of doing art over another is inherently better just doesn't sit right with me. But I think there is something truly special in the art that reflects ourselves, allows us to look upon ourselves in ways that reveal things we've never seen before, or lets us see ourselves in a new light, or simply to see ourselves where normally we can't. Sometimes experiencing art is like wandering through a forest of broken mirrors. In some, we see nothing. In others, we just see what we expect, but maybe in one of those mirrors, the light catches it in just the right way, or it's angled just right, and you suddenly see yourself in a way you never have before. When you're able to see a part of yourself in a work like that, when a work is able to put into words feelings you've always felt but never been able to express, I think that is the moment when it becomes more than words on a page, images on a screen, or paint on a canvas. That is the moment when a work becomes a part of us. The original Neon Genesis Evangelion became a part of me when Kaoru appeared and reached out to me. The end of Evangelion, by speaking words no one had ever said to me before, became a part of me too. And even though they are messy and difficult and frustrating, the Rebuild of Evangelion films are undoubtedly a part of me as well, in the same way that all of my favourite works of art are a part of me.
And for something that began as an unremarkable remake, something that hid its ambitions and its potential, something that on every step of its journey doubted its ability to do something new, I can't think of any higher praise than that.
I just wish it wasn't so fucking horny.